My dad kicked me out of the house after years of feeling like an outsider, so I didn't invite him to my wedding. Now he wants to be part of my life again, and I'm not sure how to handle it. I'm 28F and getting married next month. Here's the deal. I didn't invite my father to the wedding, and now he's trying to reach out. I feel like I need to explain why this decision was made. It all goes back to when I was just 6 years old. My parents divorced after my dad cheated on my mom with my stepmother, which was already a rough start. After that, I mostly stayed with my mom, but I spent holidays and vacations at my dad's house. When I was 8, my half-brother Jake 20 was born, and I was often expected to take care of him whenever I was with my dad. Fast forward to high school, I had to move in with my dad because my mom had to move abroad for work. This was one of the toughest times in my life. My stepmother wasn't a bad person. She really tried to include me in family activities, but she was very submissive to my dad. As for my dad, he always made me feel like I was just an extra in the household, like I didn't truly belong there. I was constantly responsible for Jake, and whenever my dad went out, he would only take my stepmother and Jake with him, leaving me behind. It was heartbreaking and lonely. Now, as I prepare for my wedding, I can't help but reflect on all that. I've finally come to a place where I want to celebrate this new chapter in my life without the weight of those past experiences hanging over me. One of the most painful experiences I went through happened when I was just 14. My dad announced that the entire family was going on vacation to Disney, and I was so excited. But then, the day before the trip, he told me that he wanted it to be a family moment, their first big trip with Jake. So there I was, left home alone while everyone else got to go have fun. This wasn't just a one-time thing. It had become a pattern. Every time there were trips to the beach, visits to the zoo, or any other outings, it always seemed to be just my stepmother and Jake while I was left behind. It felt like I was being pushed out of the family, and it hurt. My dad didn't like me going out with friends or even inviting them over. He would always say things like, "Teenagers together only cause trouble." It was frustrating because I just wanted to be a normal teenager. His controlling nature was suffocating. He would call the house phone at random times, checking to see if I was home. It felt like I was always under surveillance. To make things worse, he even had a trusted neighbor keeping an eye on me to ensure I didn't have any visitors. I felt trapped, constantly watching my dad pull away from me, while he focused all his attention on Jake and my stepmother. When I turned 16 and was still living with my dad, the feeling of being an extra in my own family only got worse. Everything I had experienced during those vacations, the exclusion and sense of abandonment, became part of my daily life. I felt invisible, like I didn't really belong anywhere. Things reached a breaking point when I turned 18. My dad got a promotion at work and decided to celebrate with a family trip to Europe. Since it was my last year of high school, I was really excited, thinking this was finally my chance to be included in something special. But then, just when I thought I'd be a part of it, he told me he didn't have enough money for a trip for 4 people. Instead, it would just be a celebration for Jake's 10th birthday. I had to stay home again. At that moment, I completely broke down. I told him he was being unfair and that he shouldn't have given me false hope. I opened up about how I'd felt over the past few years, left out, abandoned, and unwanted. But instead of understanding, he called me ungrateful and spoiled, claiming I lived with him rent-free. That was such a lie. My mom sends money every month to support me, and I did all the housework because both he and my stepmother worked late. The argument escalated quickly, and in a fit of anger, he kicked me out of the house. He said I was no longer part of the family and that I wasn't even his daughter anymore. I couldn't believe it. He literally threw me out onto the sidewalk, tossing my things out like they meant nothing. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of our relationship, and I was left feeling completely shattered and alone. Fortunately, I had a friend who lived nearby, and I stayed at her place that night. I was grateful to have somewhere to go, even if it was just for a little while. The next day, I decided to go back and see if my dad had calmed down. I was hopeful that maybe we could talk things over, but when I got there, my heart sank. My things were still on the sidewalk, and some of my belongings were even in the trash. It felt like a punch to the gut. My stepmother, surprisingly, had saved a few items for me and handed them over with an apologetic look. I appreciated her gesture, but it didn't change how I felt about the whole situation. After that day, my dad never reached out to me again. The only time he did was about a month later when he called to yell at me because my mom had stopped sending him money for my expenses. It was as if he thought I was the reason for his problems. and I couldn't believe he still wanted to blame me after everything that had happened. A few months later, I was accepted into an engineering program in another state. This was a fresh start for me, and I was determined to make the most of it. That's where I put my now fiancé, Mark 29. He was a senior, and we quickly connected over our shared interests and dreams. We started dating, and as we graduated together, it felt like we were building a life that was completely different from the one I had left behind. Now we both work in the same field, although at different companies, and I couldn't be happier with how far I've come from that painful past. A few months ago, Mark proposed to me, and I happily said yes. It was one of the happiest moments of my life, and I was excited to start planning our future together. I have social media, but I rarely use it. I've had an Instagram account for about 6 years, but I've only posted maybe 10 pictures in total. It's just not something I prioritize. About a month after I accepted Mark's proposal, I was surprised to see a message from my dad pop up on Instagram. It turned out that one of my relatives must have told him about the wedding, and he reached out to me, saying he was excited to help with the wedding plans. I was taken aback not just by the fact that he had messaged me out of the blue, but also because he genuinely believed he would have a role in my big day, like walking me down the aisle. I couldn't believe the audacity. I responded to him, explaining that he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle because my stepfather would take that honor instead. I also let him know that the wedding would be small, just for my close family and friends. I thought that would make it clear where I stood. After sending that message, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I quickly blocked him. I didn't want to deal with any more of his attempts to insert himself into my life or the wedding plans. It was time for me to focus on the love and support I have in my life now. After blocking him, feeling inspired by all those Reddit stories I'd read, I honestly expected a storm of calls, messages, and letters filled with insults. You know, things like ungrateful or spoiled. But surprisingly, the only thing I received was a letter delivered by my half-brother, Jake. Yes, we still keep in touch, which has been a bit of a lifeline for me. In the letter, my father expressed how sorry he was. I won't go into the exact words, but to sum it up, he wrote about how after kicking me out, he went on to live a normal life with my stepmother and Jake. However, everything changed when he started seeing pictures of my graduation ceremony with my mom and stepfather. That's when he began to feel deep regret. He mentioned that he wanted to talk to me, but that his pride had held him back all this time. Now, he's finally reaching out because he realized his pride got him nowhere. He even brought up one of the plans he had for me when I was born, to pay for my wedding and walk me down the aisle. Honestly, I don't know what to do with this new development. I've worked hard to move on with my life, and his sudden attempt at redemption after so many years feels a bit too convenient. Almost like he's checking a box rather than genuinely wanting to be part of my life. I'm torn between wanting to forgive and the hurt he caused me. So, Ada for not wanting to include my dad in my wedding despite his apology. Note, my stepfather is genuinely an amazing person. He goes out of his way to include me in everything, making sure I always feel like I belong. My stepsisters are wonderful too, and we've built a close bond over the years. I remember when my stepfather found out that my dad hadn't taken me to Disney. He immediately planned a trip for the next holiday. He made it happen for me, my mom, and my sisters, ensuring we all had a fantastic time together. It's moments like these, along with countless others, that make me want to walk down the aisle with him on my wedding day. Edit 1. I've seen some questions asking why my mom and stepfather left me with my dad and what their jobs are. My mom works as a programmer, and she managed to land a job abroad, which was a big opportunity for her. She thought it was best to accept the position, especially since she wanted to save up a substantial amount of money for my college expenses and for our future. My stepfather is a researcher and was busy with his postdoctoral work at the time. They both had valid reasons for their decisions, but it was tough for me, especially living with my dad. However, I truly appreciate how my mom and stepfather have supported me through everything. The first person to reach out to me was my older stepsister. Just 2 days after my dad kicked me out, she came over to check on me. She even stayed for a few days, trying to lift my spirits, although I can barely remember much of it because I was so caught up in crying and feeling lost. It meant a lot to have her there, but I didn't move in with her since she lives in another state, and I was almost done with my classes and had final exams approaching. Fortunately, my friend, who is also one of my bridesmaids, offered me a place to stay. Her parents were incredibly kind and helped me gather my belongings from my dad's house. They even set up the guest room for me, making it a little more comfortable during such a tough time. It was such a relief to have their support while I navigated through all of this chaos. Update: 1 day later. I'm back with an update, but first, let me explain why I'm using a different account. The original one belonged to my friend. I'm not very active on social media, so I didn't create my own account just to post something I didn't think would get much attention. I figured there would be maybe one follow-up to share whether or not I invited my dad to the wedding. But then, some people pointed out inconsistencies, like the age difference and why I mentioned my parents were married in one post, but not in this one. So, that's why I switched things up. The story you read was actually my friend's, the same friend who let me stay with her. She encouraged me to share my own experience because I wanted opinions from neutral people, not those who are close to me or my dad. And wow, did I get a lot of feedback, lol. Now, about the comments. I want to thank everyone for helping me notice things I hadn't seen before, especially regarding how my dad's letter was written. For those wondering, yes, it was mostly about his feelings and how he felt. Very little was focused on me, and even less on actually apologizing. He did mention how I'm his only daughter, while my stepfather has 2 daughters to walk down the aisle with, but he only has me. As for why I didn't move abroad with my mom and stepfather, they were supposed to be away for 3 to 5 years, and my mom would likely need to change companies every year. My stepfather was also deep into his research, so their lives were pretty unstable at that time. I never anticipated how much I'd suffer or that I'd end up kicked out. The rare times I spent with my dad and the feeling of being left behind would fade whenever I was with my mom and stepfather. That cycle became my routine, which is why I stayed with my sperm donor. And to answer those asking if my mom knew what was going on, I only told her about the Disney incident. I didn't want to bring issues from one home into another. Now for the update. For some background on my mom, she came back into my life 2 years after I started college, and my real dad returned a year after that. It was my sisters who attended my high school graduation. Now, my mom lives about 2 hours away, so I went to visit her to talk about everything that had happened and to get her and my stepfather's thoughts on the situation. My mom told me it was something I had to decide on my own and that she wouldn't interfere. My stepfather offered to help pay for the wedding. No matter what I chose to do, yes, he's helping with some of the expenses. On the other hand, my sisters share the same opinion as most of you. They think I shouldn't invite him and that I should send him a letter detailing everything I went through. My older sister, let's call her Lisa, was the most inviting against him. Lisa was the first person to check on me after I was kicked out. Today, I learned that on the same day she came to see me at my friend's house. She also stopped to talk to my dad. She hadn't mentioned it before because, according to her, he only spouted nonsense, and sharing it at the time would have just made things worse for me. That's why she's completely against me reconnecting with him. For those curious about what he said, she didn't go into too many details, but mentioned that it angered her so much that she ended up shouting at him, calling him every name under the sun. She thinks this might be one of the reasons he didn't reach out sooner. She believes that her outburst added fuel to the fire. We talked a lot, not just about my dad, but also about myself and my feelings. I realized that even with the therapy I went through during college, there was something crucial I hadn't done. I never truly opened up to my parents. I always thought I had to face and overcome everything on my own. But all I really did was bottle everything up inside. Today, for the first time, I was finally able to unpack it all and share my feelings. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and I'm grateful to have my sisters and stepfather supporting me through this process. After a lot of tears, I hugged both Lisa and my stepfather. Their support means everything to me, and here's what I've decided. I will respond to my dad's letter. Unfortunately for Mark and Lisa, it won't be the harsh response they were hoping for. Instead, I'll take some of your advice and express how I truly felt when he kicked me out. I plan to be polite but honest, sharing my feelings without holding back. I'll also let him know that my stepfather will walk me down the aisle because that's what I want. I've decided not to offer any further explanations to him. After all, this is my marriage with Mark, and it will be exactly how we want it, without needing to justify our choices to anyone. I will not accept any money from him, nor will I send him an invitation. If my dad wants to reconcile, he can truly reach out to me through Jake. But that will only happen after the wedding or honeymoon, and it will be entirely on my terms. As someone suggested, we're going to hire security for the wedding, just in case my dad reacts in an unexpected way. I want to ensure that our special day goes smoothly without any unnecessary drama. For those wondering, yes, Jake has been invited. As I mentioned before, we still have a good relationship, and he's more than welcome to take photos and be part of our celebration. This is a new chapter in my life, and I want to surround myself with the people who genuinely care about me and support my happiness.